Well, per usual, there's a few things that I forgot to mention about working in Checotah PD, which I did absolutely love working in Checotah. Um, there's a lot more happening, a lot busier than you would think being a small town. But since we were, well, I mean, in a small town, cops do everything. It's not like a lot of cities where you're a traffic cop or you work domestics or these kind of cases or we had a detective, but everybody was a detective, to be honest. So it's not like that you just handed everything to the detective. I never handed anything to a detective. Um, but that being said, one of my first stories is when I first met what we called the Casey boys. Uh, they they weren't necessarily bad guys. They were just very rambunctious. They didn't have a big liking for law enforcement. And well, the first time I ever met them, I one of them was really drunk, and he gets out of the vehicle, and there's a couple of us there. Well, there's three officers, I believe, there, and he was in the passenger side, really drunk, um, and he gets out of the vehicle, and I tell him to stay right there, and he starts getting wanting to fight, and I just got Taser certified. Not long before this, and so I carried a taser. I did not carry pepper spray after that incident in Quota. I never carried pepper spray again. I never carried a baton or an asp. I didn't like the idea. Basically, I carried my taser or my gun. That was it. Um, so he keeps coming forward, and I tell him if he keeps on, coming forward aggressively, I will tase him. And I had my taser pulled out, and he kept forward, and he lunged at me, so I tased him. He fell to the ground, and it lasts 5 seconds. That's why we call it a 5 second ride. And when he stopped, he starts getting back up, so I tased him again. When it stops, he starts getting back up, so I tased him again. Well, after the third time, I remembered that that's not how we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to handcuff him as soon as while the taser's running, because it's not going to tase us. So I handcuffed him and stuff, but he was not very happy about that. And the boys, this is the first time the Casey boys had ever dealt with me, and they didn't really take a real big liking to me after that. Um, so we put them in the jail, and they were going to be released in the morning anyway. Um, I was only getting him for intox, public intox, which is he stayed overnight and everything, and we were going to release him on his own recognizance. Well, apparently they were talking all night because I didn't work the graveyard shift. They were talking all night um, about because there was two of them that got arrested about fighting me as soon as they get released, and the officer, the other officer, who Officer Beasley, who absolutely hated me. He's one of the officers that did not call EMS, told me to call EMS whenever my blood sugar dropped. But he ended up not releasing them. He left me to release them because I was the officer that was coming in the morning, and he did it on purpose. And so I was asked how I was going to handle it because I was the only officer on duty in the morning. I said, well, I'm going to release them one by one. And before I release them, I'm going to bring them into the office and talk to them. And so that's what I did. And I had a very blunt conversation with them that nothing's personal. I mean, I don't care who they are. I'm not trying to fight them or hurt them or anything. I said I would, in the same breath of arresting them, I'll save their life because it's not personal. And we ended up having a pretty casual, candid conversation. And the other brother, same thing. So they're pretty cool after that. Um, so I didn't have any more dealings. Well, other guys did, but I didn't really have a whole lot of slack from them. They usually gave me respect. Um, but I was still I was a rookie. I was very green. Because I just got out of the academy. Well, at that time, I was a chapter advisor in my fraternity still, and they had a bid day party in um, Tahlequah. At this party, it is a private function, invite only, and it's out in the county, and we rented a women's auxiliary hall, and it sets off into the back, and you can't see it from the road at all. And there's actually a locked gate. Well, we left it unlocked during the party, but there was a gate. So to get there, you had to be intentional. And again, I said it's a private party; it's not open to the public. Well, while everybody was, I was a designated driver, didn't have anything to drink. I was just watching everybody. And, mind you, I said I was a police officer at the time. And so I'm watching these cats. Um, no, I didn't ID everybody because I wasn't in my jurisdiction anyway, but that wasn't my intent there. And cops' intents aren't always to throw everybody in jail like like people think it is. Um, but I was just trying to make. I mean, they were going to have the party anyway, and I was just trying to make sure everybody was safe. Well, I'm sitting inside, and next thing I know, all these cops start coming in, and then I went. They start telling everybody to get out and line up against the wall. And I asked a few of the guys what was going on. They said they just drove up there and just entered the building. I was like, really? I was like, they never asked, never had a warrant. They didn't ask to come inside. And everybody at the door said, no, they never asked to come inside. And so when they were lining us up against the wall, I said, hey, I said, here's my driver's license because they were asking for driver's license. I was like, but you can't do this. This isn't legal. And then, of course, he said, what makes you think you know anything about the law? And I was pretty cocky, and I said, well, because I, scored, I aced the legal block in the academy. I know the laws very well, you know. Um, he said, really? He said, well, you stay right here. And so he left me against the wall. Then when everybody was lined up at the wall, the deputy that was ahead of everything, um, he he said he lectured us for a minute, and then he told everybody. He said, all the designated drivers, I want you to step forward. And there was about 50 of us, and I was one of them. So I stepped forward. He said, all but you go ahead and step back. I was like, okay. He said, now everybody else, I want you to go with the designated driver, and I want you to go home right now. And then he points at me again and said, except you. And so I'm sitting there, and everybody takes off, and I'm there by myself for like 15 minutes and not knowing at all what's going on. Well, then he comes up to me and he starts lecturing me about how I know better than to get involved with another officer's case, and I needed to learn my lesson, and that for me to just shut up, that it's none of my business what's going on. And then he proceeds to put me in handcuffs and has a tribal marshal, as Cherokee Police Department, um, the Cherokee Tribe Police Department, or Choctaw, is Cherokee Tribe, but he had them drive me to the jail. And while on our drive, I looked at him and I said, "What am I being arrested for?" And he said, "I don't know." He was like, "Really?" It's like, "Okay." Well, we get into the jail, and then they start booking me in. They take my booking photo, and then they make me strip in front of the deputy. And I'm like, and it becomes a strip search. And I'm like, what? Wait a second. You can't strip search somebody. I was like, you have to have PC to believe that they have either guns or weapons. I mean, weapons or drugs on them. And I've never been charged with weapons charges or drug charges. And I was like, this has nothing to do with weapons or guns. I mean, drugs. And the guy just kept quiet and just said, he said, that's none of my business. You just need to do it. So I get searched and everything. And then they put me into the drunk tank. And again, I hadn't had a single drop to drink. And then that morning, I didn't even get to make a phone call. But that morning, a buddy of mine who happens to be a police officer now, um, and he was a jailer at that time in another county, I believe. But he bails me out. But I find out then that I was actually arrested for public intox. And so that morning, Saturday morning, I immediately tell my chief, and we were privy to the booking photos and everything because it's called ODCR, or sorry, Otis. It's called an Otis system, but just ODIS, I believe. Um, but he's looking at it, and I showed him. I was like, "Do I look like I'm intoxicated at the time?" He said, "No, you look pretty pissed." I was like, "Well, I was pissed." He said, "Well, did you learn anything?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Keep my mouth shut until I go talk to his supervisor later." But at the time, it's sometimes best to keep your mouth shut. And it was a valuable lesson. I learned that. But I went and talked to the DA and explained to him. I was like, I was like, they never, had done anything to prove that I was intoxicated. Never even asked me if I'd been drinking. And, and I was like, and two, I was like, first they violated my Fourth Amendment rights by even arresting me because they didn't have a charge. They made up a charge. Second, I was like, they violated my Fourth Amendment rights because they searched me they strip searched me for and didn't have PC to do that. So they dropped all the charges, of course. But still, people say that uh, the all cops are protecting each other and stuff, and that's not it. That's not true at all. Now there are places that they do that, but it's a corrupt cop protecting a corrupt cop. Good cops don't protect corrupt cops. That's just not in my experience, my 11 years. Um, but that was Cherokee County. I mean, they were known for it, you know. But anyway, so a couple years go by, and a buddy of mine, um, who was actually the buddy of mine that I went to North Carolina and visited with, him and his wife. They'd moved back to Oklahoma. No, they hadn't moved back to Oklahoma. They were down in Oklahoma just visiting, and he asked me if he could visit. And I was like, "Hey, you want to do a ride along?" He's like, "Yeah." So he rides with me one night. Well, we end up in a couple of domestics, a pursuit, a gun call. I mean, it was pretty busy that night, and he had a blast. He didn't realize that it was that fun. I was like, this is a small town. People think they're sleepy, nothing happens. A lot happens in a small town. Most people actually know the cop by name, and so they feel they can get away with more. I've fought friends of mine, or people I thought were friends, and I learned a valuable lesson that when in the heat of an emotion, who you may think is your friend isn't your friend at the time. People change when they're emotional. That's why I always try never. I don't even have to try. I can't think of a time I've ever even made a decision out of emotion, but it's pretty impactful that lesson. And so, but my buddy calls me actually, like 6 months later, and tells me that uh, he just got hired by Tulsa PD, which was shocking because my buddy was actually going to school to be a brain surgeon. And I believe he'd already had his bachelor's. He was actually getting ready to do the medical, the actual doctorate side and everything. Or he'd been in school for a while, and everything was geared towards brain surgery. So I told his wife, I said, I don't know whether to say, congratulations or I'm sorry. And that was back then. It's even now. I'm even more. God, I don't think joining the police force is a smart decision for a lot of people, but we need good cops. Um, anyway, that's a side note. So the last time I ever dealt with the Casey boys, though, they I get this call um, uh, that we're looking for. It was we were at a call at a gas station, and he said that there was a gun at the Casey boys' house, and they were fighting. And then not too long after that, there was a domestic call, disturbance call at their house, and so and the vehicle that supposedly had the gun was there. And so me and a couple of guys get there. We run hot, which means run with lights and sirens on, and we get there and stuff. And there's probably 15 people in the yard, and they were not fighting. We get out of the vehicle, and we find out that they actually was setting us up. They were wanting to fight the cops. And so my partners, one of them happened to be Beasley, and the other one was a friend of his who had tried getting me in trouble with law enforcement or with the academy and everything else because I'd gotten arrested and stuff, which the academy knew about. Because that drunk call was prior to me being fully graduated from the academy. So it's kind of confusing, but still, I'm trying to remember all the lessons or all the things that I've done. But so we're sitting there, and they're starting to talk a lot of shit to us, and my partners take off. They just jet. So it's just me and 15 guys. I'd like to say I was a badass and I whooped all of them, but I didn't. But I also didn't leave because I'm too stupid to run. Um, I didn't start talking crap to them. I didn't threaten them at all. I just started talking to them like I'd talk to anybody else. And pretty soon we're just shooting the shit, to be honest. And but after that moment, the Casey boys really started respecting me. Anytime I got a call where one of them, they would listen to me. Now they'd try to fight another officer, and it wasn't because I was a Billy Badass cop. I treated them with respect. It was nothing personal. Um, but anyway, I figured I'd supplement some of my stories in Checotah because it was a few learning things. And I have a ton more, but hell, I could make a whole podcast just on the stories. Um, anyway, so me and my first wife were in. We moved to Mountain View, Wyoming, which it was snowing, and it was early April when we moved up there, and I was not used to that. But I by that time I was starting to be on pills pretty bad. Um, I started increasing them and everything. I was always hurting because I'd actually fallen at work one day on the job. Ended up hitting my head, and so they gave me some pain pills, and I just started taking them more and more. Um, we get there, and that by that time when we move up there, we were excited and stuff, but I didn't know that everybody there were Mormon, which is not a big deal. I don't really care what your religious beliefs are, but they're very big about converting people that are there, especially if you work for anything government. Everybody that worked for police departments in that area, deputies in that area, they were all Mormon. All the council was Mormon. The mayor was Mormon. Um, and I stood out like a sore thumb, and so did my wife at the time. In fact, we were in a grocery store at one time, and they there's this old lady walks up to her, and she didn't dress. My wife did at the time. My second wife did not dress like a whore or anything, but apparently this woman thought she did because she went over there and she grabbed her coat, my ex-wife's coat, and just closed it on her and stuff. But yeah, she loved that one. But things started getting worse between me and Stephanie, which was ironic because she was wanting me to leave law enforcement because we were running out of money. And my income as a police officer was never strong enough, and she had to get a job, and that was not. She was not happy about that. So she had to start working, and I was working, and we were still, barely paying bills. Um, but it's a lesson I learned is nickel and diming. Just buying small things constantly. And I was always saying yes. So I can't blame her because I didn't say no. Uh, but the area up there was beautiful and everything. I mean, it was really nice. I mean, we were only a couple hours from Salt Lake City in Utah. Um, but it was the first department I'd ever been in that actually had a quota on on writing speeding tickets. People always like to, judge police officers and say they're just trying to meet their quota and all this other stuff. I've never ran into that except for this one department, and that's because most states, um, the way they have things set up, is that a police department cannot get wealthy off of speeding tickets, off of tickets like that at all, except for Wyoming is not set up like that at all. They actually, I guess, they take all business taxes and they divide it based on population. So it's kind of a socialist setup. That's why you'll see some really nice government buildings in these towns with 500 people in it. Um, but I was forced to write tickets, and when I was in Checotah, I wrote in 3 years, 3 or 4 years, 3 years. I'd only written three tickets that did not involve arrest. Of course, arrest you have to write a citation with it because your citation is giving the probable cause of why to pull somebody over. Um, but I hated it. I absolutely hated it because I had to. I because people. I mean, people did speed pretty bad, but it never caused. I never worked a wreck there. People didn't wreck. And that was the reason why you wrote speeding tickets was to slow people down to prevent accidents. But there weren't any accidents. Hell, there weren't any stop signs. Um, but we had like lots of nice equipment and stuff. I got to drive a pretty nice truck and stuff. I had nice guns that they issued. Um, but I was not happy, and I was still trying to be a family member with my family, even though I just didn't feel like they really cared. I mean, they still never called me or anything. But one day, we get to the 6 month part, and when I'm supposed to be getting my raise, they actually said I was not getting a raise. The mayor said, "Nope, you're not getting a raise." Didn't give me a reason, but I was pretty sure it was because I never converted. I know that's just hearsay and everything, but they were on me bad. I mean, uh, the last month that I lived there, they'd been trying really hard, and then suddenly we had two cats, and they were inside outside cats. And one day, one of our cats went missing, and then We find it the next day dead in our yard. And then the next day we find another cat, our other cat, dead in our yard. Our yard was small. And we kept our trimmed down. So, I mean, it wasn't like he got lost in our yard or anything. And somebody had shot the cat. And then the next day we find somebody else's cat in our yard. I mean, they were dead set about getting rid of us. Uh, they were, sorry, I'm trying to remember everything from Wyoming. I was there for such a short amount of time, but we spent every, every dollar we had, to be honest. We were broke now. I still had my house in Checotah because I was renting it out, but I wasn't there to take care of it. So I had a buddy of mine. It was his sister that was renting it, and she was in the medical field. So I assumed everything was great. But I wasn't making any money off of it because I had to take a loan, and her payment was paying for the loan. Um, and so my second wife was really upset because, again, you know, we were broke, and she didn't have any friends up there. I didn't either, but I was okay with not having friends. So we decided that we're going to go back home, and so I put in my notice, and my chief said, "No, I don't need your 2 weeks. You can leave." I'm like, "Okay." Well, which is pretty standard for a lot of police departments. It's shitty, but it's standard. Um, so we have a garage sale. End up selling most of my guns, uh, and I was, it is, I was kind of, I don't know, I was a different person back then, and I remember there was these missionaries, Mormon missionaries, come to my house, young kids. I say young kids; they were probably 18, 19 year old. Well, no, they were. He was probably around closer. He was in his early 20s. Him and his friend were both in their early 20s. Um, but I don't know, somewhere around there. But they were adults, but I called them kids. Anyway, I'd already kept telling people because I had missionaries come to my house at least every other day, and they wanted to talk with me and stuff. I was like, no, I was like, I don't really feel like talking. Then I was like, you know what? I'll talk with you if one of you buy a gun. Well, they can't buy guns. And I kept talking with them and stuff. They're like, no, no. We kept on, just BSing with each other. And finally, one of them did actually buy one of my guns. I was like, well, what about you? And he's like, no, no, I don't need to buy a gun. And I said, well, say the word fuck. Well, they can't cuss either. And I never did get him to say it, but it was just I was being a jackass, to be honest. It was wrong because I shouldn't make somebody do something that's against their faith, but it actually kind of proved a point that my feelings towards a lot of religions anyway at the time, Christianity even, was that people aren't who they say they are. They don't really have faith in who they say they have faith in. They don't really believe what they preach. And that was my feeling towards belief systems, because that's what I saw all the time. People trying to. It's like the only reason they even had their belief system was to tell somebody that they're better than them, and that's what it felt like. But anyway, so we we get everything packed up and stuff, and we get everything in a I don't even know if we had a U-Haul. Yeah, we rented a U-Haul, and we still had my truck, and we drove back, all the way back and everything. And I think we stopped at a few places, but I I just remembered another story that I was going to mention. Um, it was actually from before high school. Anyways, intermission. You know what? No, I'll tell that one separately here in a little bit. But so we get back to Checotah, and we actually ended up moving in with Donna because I check out my house, and I told them not to smoke in it. And I told her if she has anybody else stay with her that she's to notify me. And she apparently had a boyfriend that moved in with her, and I found a uh, black and mild that was half burnt on the bathroom sink. Um, there was dog crap all over the my back porch and everything, and there was a water line had busted and through the wall and the floor and stuff, and it was a complete wreck. And I bought the house for 115,000, and I owed 55,000 on it, because I ended up getting a loan. I paid cash for it, and again, we spent so much money all the time that I couldn't afford it anymore. And I mean, and we didn't spend a lot of money. It was just nickel and diming, just spending small things. I mean, you got to think about it. If you're buying 3 energy drinks a day, that's $9 a day. $9 times 30, it adds up. And that's just on energy drinks. I don't know why we weren't smart enough to buy them in bulk, but I wasn't smart enough for a lot of things. But I decided to get back to work. And my mind only thought of law enforcement. That's it. Because that's what made me happy. I don't know. To be completely honest, I knew it at the time. I only was with my second wife because I wanted to save somebody. I wanted to take care of somebody because she needed help. She needed somebody. She didn't have anybody. And it wasn't working. But I tried. I didn't admit it, but we didn't really get along the greatest. We definitely weren't like best friends or anything. But I ended up getting a job at Muskogee County as a deputy inside the jail. They had another name for it. I forgot what it was called, but so I was a sheriff's deputy, but I just happened to work inside the jail. Um, and I only worked there for a very short time. I ended up getting into another car wreck, and ended up jacking up my neck, and they let me go after that. And I tried to go back to college, and of course that didn't work out either. Uh, and so we didn't know what we were going to do, and so I said, why don't we actually back up? When I decided to go back to college, we moved to Tahlequah, where I went to school in the first, college before, and I was going to try to finish, my bachelor's degree, because I left and I had like 60 something hours. I should have had a lot more than that, but I always took the minimum out, and then I didn't even finish them. But so we start there, and we move in with my buddy Zach, with him and his first wife, and which was nice until we got our own apartment, but it was crowded. Um, and so we got at this apartment, and uh, I ended up dropping out, but I got a job at T-Bone's restaurant, a nightclub, dance hall, bar is everything. Um, and she got a job there. I was a security and bouncer basically, and she was a waitress. So I get a job at T-Bones, and I drop out of school, and I'm working there full time, not making real good money, but not bad either for what it was and where it was. And I enjoyed the job per se. I got to meet a lot of people, and actually he had a lot of uh, names that were that big at one time. Like I met Ty Herndon. Shoot, having a brain fart. Sings Private Malone, and I've got a thinking problem. I don't know. He ended up being more of an alcoholic type of guy. He was just always drunk. But I also met Heath Wright with and the band Ricochet, and they were big in the late '90s, early 2000s. Um, but or David Ball, that's his name. But Heath Wright I actually ended up being quasi friends with. We'd actually talk amongst each other, and he was going through a divorce, and so we just chit chat for a while online, or on instant messenger and stuff. Then I ended up driving down there to Vian and try to have him teach me how to play guitar, which I sucked at, and I was not catching on at all. Um, but I still miss being a police officer. Um, and so I ended up applying for a city that's pretty close by, and I had really low self esteem, so I never even tried to get on bigger departments. I just never thought I was good enough, and so I'd go to these small departments that didn't pay anything, and then they always ended up having issues. Well, I went here at Hulbert, which had a reputation for being a speed trap. In fact, years before this, they'd actually lost their ability to be a police department for 2 years because of speed traps. People don't understand that there's a speed trap law. If a certain percentage of your tickets are less than 10 miles over, then you can actually lose your department. There's been a couple of departments in Oklahoma that have lost their departments for a couple of years. Anyway, so I'm working at this department, and my first day should have told me everything about Hulbert. And this is in Cherokee County, by the way, which was the county that I got arrested in for opening my mouth. Um, so we're driving, and I told him, I was like, yeah, I don't have a stomach for corruption. I always believe in doing the right thing. And I tell people, and even in my interviews, I always tell the chief or the sheriff, like, hey, if it becomes a question between what's legal and what's right, I will always choose what's right. I firmly believe in doing what's right, because there's sometimes that, yeah, it's illegal to arrest somebody, but it's crappy. Like, I had a woman once when I was in Quota. She was from Missouri, and she had three small kids. She had no family around there at all. She was nowhere near home. You could tell that she was on a tight budget, and she had a suspended license. And I didn't arrest her. And in Oklahoma, you're required by law to arrest somebody if they have a suspended license. And I didn't. And I wasn't ashamed to say I didn't. I just let her go. Yeah, if she kept driving, it would have been my fault because I allowed her to keep going. But that's an if. If I arrested her, I knew that her kids would be in somebody else's custody, at least for the night, you know. And I just couldn't do that. And then I put them in a worse situation. So sometimes choosing right is not the legal route. It's just the way it is. But that doesn't mean that you're going out breaking the law or anything. It's like constitutional laws. If your state requires you to have a concealed handgun license to be able to carry a gun, uh, then they're violating the Constitution, plain and simple, because it's not a right anymore. It's a privilege. A right you don't have to pay for, because what if you don't have the money? So they're violating your rights. Regardless, I didn't mean to go into that. But so I tell this to he calls himself a lieutenant. It was a really small department. They had a few reserves, but the only full-time police officer was the chief and Casey Jones, who was a lieutenant. But this city had a population of around 500 people in the whole city. But he drove a brand new Charger, and had a camera system on it and everything, with a GPS tracker, with a town that's like 2 miles long. In his house, he had a 6-car garage. And the chief's house was this huge log cabin. I've worked for a few chiefs, and I've seen their houses, and they weren't that great because they didn't make that great of money. I mean, the chief in Checotah, I think, only made like 45,000 a year. It's just, there are departments that you can make really good money at. I wasn't working there. Um, Anyways, what he tells me is, he's like, well, I understand that. He said, but if I tell you to do something, he's saying, I understand that as in, not that I wouldn't do anything that was wrong. I will always choose what's right. He said, if I ever tell you to do something, then you're protected under me. So, and what that told me, he just told me that he is liable to do something corrupt. But if he asked me to do something corrupt, then it's on him, not me, which is not true. It's on me, and on him, but it's on me. If I'm ordered to do something that's illegal, I can say no. If I'm ordered to do something that's unconstitutional, I can say no. Um, I have friends that have done it now, and they did not lose their jobs because their chiefs knew. Anyway, back to my story. So I only worked there for 7 weeks. While working there, I had found that we were told directly or I was told directly, that if somebody is driving under a tag that's expired, I am to write a ticket. And if it's 90 days expired, then I have to tow the vehicle. I've never been told I had to tow vehicles before. If it is a paper tag, meaning that they just bought the vehicle and it is expired by 1 day, I'm supposed to tow the vehicle. Well, the reason why he said this was because the tow company that was towing vehicles in that town also did work for the city police department. And so it was giving them more work and getting paid. And then I was also told that I am not allowed to arrest people. Instead, detain them and then have somebody come and pay their bond to me in cash, which is not something I was going to do because that's illegal. Um, uh, and it's unethical at the very least. Um, and so one night I actually tested this out, and I pulled over a guy in a truck, and and he obviously had an odor of an alcoholic beverage on him, on his person, and I asked him to step out, and I did the field sobriety and everything, and yeah, he was intoxicated. Well, I didn't know while before I even approached the vehicle, he called Casey, Lieutenant Casey, and he gives me a call and says to let him go. And I said, no, I can't do that. He's drunk. He said, well, let somebody come get the vehicle. And I said, I can't do that. He said, well, I'm ordering you to do that. He said, you're to let somebody come pick him up and somebody else to take his vehicle. And so I had to do that. But I felt wrong about it, but I really didn't have a whole lot of options at the time. Um, and then I think I pressed the last straw whenever I go to a domestic, and I get there, and this brother, they were adults, just beat the crap out of his sister. And so I arrest him. And the thing about it is that the police department did all their reports in pen, handwritten. They didn't do anything on computer because they didn't want a paper trail. Um, and so I actually drove to Cherokee County, or I drove to the sheriff's department, and I wrote out my report. And I arrested the guy and stuff, and I get called into the office, and they demoted me to part time because I arrested him, and I was given specific orders not to. And so, and then they took my vehicle away, and I had to, I could drive it on when I was on duty, but I couldn't drive it home or anything. So I went to part time. Um, in the meantime, we're sitting there having trouble because my wife at the time was trying to get paid from her boss, and she didn't get a paycheck, and nobody got a paycheck. They didn't have any paychecks. And I was like, how did they not? I mean, they were always busy. So, I mean, how did they not have the money to do it? So I started doing some research, and I found in Dallas, Texas, he was in the Dallas Tribune. They called him Reverend Fix It. There was a 7-page article on him. Apparently, he would buy these schools. Um, well, he was saying he was buying these schools, get all this money to fix it, and then take off with money. And now he'd started doing that with this business because we found out he didn't pay. He would have a contractor come and build something, and he didn't have any money, or he didn't pay them, and so they quit the job halfway or whatnot, and somebody else would come and finish the job, and he wouldn't pay them. So he had two people fixing things, and he didn't pay anybody. Uh, so we ended up completely out of a job there. Um, and that's when we decided to go back to Checotah. Um, and now I'm really addicted to pain pills. I was taking 10 Lortab-10s a day. But I wasn't. It wasn't like I was trying to get high. I was just every couple of hours I'd pop a couple of pills. Um, I didn't realize it was uh, depression and everything. I didn't realize that I was, I just thought I was hurting more, so I needed them more. They weren't working as well. And so my second wife actually never even seen me sober yet. Uh, but anyway, so we go back to Checotah, and I get on at McIntosh County in the jail, and I worked there for a little while until I finally got offered a position as a deputy in Latimer County. And I thought my life was about to turn around now. I was going to go back to what I loved doing, and that's being a street cop or deputy or something. I'd always want to be a deputy because they get to work out in the country and stuff, and I love the country. But I really thought everything was about to turn around. It just seemed like I was like, man, this is awesome. Um, only problem is I didn't have the money to move to Latimer County. That's when a buddy of mine, I talked, my out of nowhere, my old sergeant from Quota, the one that saved me from the other sergeant, um, calls me, and he actually I didn't realize he was out. He was no longer a police officer. That call that we were on ended up making him disabled, where he couldn't be a police officer anymore. And so he started his own company where he builds custom homes. So he's doing really well. And he told me, he said, yeah, um, the reason why, because I had no idea why I was asked to quit. And he told me, he said, well, you didn't do anything. What they'd found out was that they hired me and didn't have the money to pay me, and they didn't know what to do because I was a part of Fraternal Order of Police, so they couldn't fire me, and they couldn't lay me off because I was a contract employee. I mean, I was under a contract, as in they, not technically a contractor, but I was under a union, and so they had to have a reason to let go of me. So unless I quit, and so he convinced me that I was going to be fired when I was never going to be fired. Anyway, he ended up actually paying for me to move. And I'd never had somebody do that before, but and it meant the world to me. But I think that's actually, you know what? I want to, right before this happened. I know I do this a lot, but I just remembered. I was actually, when I was working in the jail, we didn't want to stay living at Donna's anymore. Not because of her, because it just wasn't. I mean, married people shouldn't be living with somebody else. Um, my aunt and uncle had a small little fifth wheel trailer. They had been converted, and they said we could live on their land and live in this trailer. And so we did. And it was miserable, because it was cold and it was not designed for the cold. I mean, it was really cramped up. It really, really made us feel poor. And we were running out of propane. And I remember my Uncle Leonard actually uh, gave me $100. And I didn't ask him for money. He gave me $100. And a week later, my Uncle Larry tells me that I need to pay my Uncle Leonard back. And I didn't have the money. I mean, I didn't even ask to borrow $100. And so I ended up giving it back to him. But we were hurting. And though, don't get me wrong, I love the fact that we were out in the middle of the woods. I mean, we were we were on 80 acres that had no houses or anything on it. Um, but which kind of made me think that I should have probably bought the property. But you know, anyway, so we're now moving to uh, Tahlequah, or not Tahlequah, sorry. We're now moving to Latimer County, and I'm actually going to be a deputy. So yeah, good place to stop.